Hi, welcome to the 8th season of the Productized podcast. My name is André, and I'm hosting today's episode. We're diving deep into product challenges and emerging opportunities. And today we have a very special guest, Shanif Dhanani, founder of Nobi AI and former CEO and co-founder of Apteo. Former employee at Tap Commerce, which was acquired by Twitter, Shanif has extensive experience in AI, machine learning, and e-commerce, and today we'll be discussing the future of personalization and scaling startups and driving business growth through data science. Welcome to the show, Shanif.
André, well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to chat with you today. I've heard great things. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let's dive, but before we do that, let's start just with our 3 questions that we're usually doing. People coming to the show. What's your favorite app or tech product right now?
I'm going to be very biased, but I'm going to say ChatGPT because it has helped me write a ton of code over the past year and a half. If I'm not being as biased, I might say Reddit because I get a lot of really good information from there. But if I had to choose, it would be ChatGPT.
And for codes, are you a ChatGPT team or a Claude team?
I mostly use ChatGPT. Well, I use this plugin called Copilot for my IDE, and then I use ChatGPT. I will say I've had to use Claude once when ChatGPT could not get me the answer, but that was about 6 months ago.
Okay. What kind of language are you programming in right now?
Now, today we're using Java, and a lot of people are going to laugh at me because that's not as popular. In my last company, Apteo, we used Python. We used Python for 5 years, and I had a lot of problems with it. And I've just found that the constraints that Java brings make it a lot easier to build a more stable system. So Java on the back end and React, JavaScript on the front end.
Yeah, I know we're kind of digressing a little bit, but Java used to be very popular language back when I left college, like 1999, early 2000s. Those were the days of Java, right? Everyone was doing it. So I was not expecting.
No, most people
Maybe
aren't.
I should have done my research a little bit better. Yeah, and every time you hear something which doesn't really go along, like everybody else, I'm doing Python or I'm doing one of these trendy new languages. What's the underlying thesis you have for Java? Because you're a seasoned entrepreneur, you've been running a lot of tech companies, and now you've landed and you've stayed in Java. So you must have very good reasons for that.
I've used every language under the sun. My first job was C#, and then we used Ruby on Rails, and then it was Java, and then I did Python for my last one, even done a little bit of C++. Here's what I think. When I used Python, we ran into a lot of issues where the lack of typing bit us in the butt. We would deploy code that wasn't caught in our integration tests to production, and there were things that were problems, and that resulted in user errors, and those things could be easily mitigated with a compiled language. So that's why we decided to go compiled. Now you say, well, Java is compiled, but so is Scala, so is some other languages. And I would say, because I really like the way that Java makes everything explicit. And I think that explicit is always better than implicit because it leads to people being able to understand the code a lot more easily. And so Java provides that. It's a personal preference combined with experience. A lot of people are going to disagree with me, but if I'm being frank, we've had far fewer issues, much more stable deployments, and much more stable infrastructure using Java.
I see. Are you using an open source stack, or you're using more closed sourced vendors and kind of?
Yeah, it's funny when you build a large application, you end up pulling in thousands of libraries. You probably have seen this, Andre. It sounds like you know a lot about this stuff. So we use a lot of open source libraries, like a lot of people do. That being said, we are using LLMs on the back end, and the LLMs we're using are ChatGPT, Llama, sometimes Claude, sometimes Gemini. Some of those are closed source. So what my thinking is just use the tools that are going to do the best job that people can understand that are available on something like Gradle or Maven. And then if you need to build around them, you can build custom code. So it's a lot of open source tools.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. All right. So what's the most unusual or interesting thing about you that people can't find online? And most times people answer everything is online nowadays. That's true. But still, that you think that is maybe not online.
It's a great Great question. You're right. Everything is online, but I would say I do a lot of work with people with disabilities up in the like the Himalaya Mountains area, and there's a lot of people out there who are a little less fortunate. And so we're actually putting together a charitable project where my family is distributing wheelchairs to people with disabilities, sewing machines to widows who need to make money. And so this is one project that I find very interesting. I think that there's a lot of interesting things to be done with helping people who perhaps are less fortunate and who didn't have the start that I did. So that's not on the internet yet. It might be by the time this airs, but that is something that I find to be really interesting and personally fulfilling.
You're originally from Pakistan, you were saying,
Yep.
and eventually you ended up going to the US. You studied computer science and there. So what's like the luck factor that you think you've had in your life that obviously not
Oh,
many people have, right?
well, I'll clarify. My parents were from Pakistan, and they
Yeah.
moved to the U.S. So I was born here. But I was born here when they were in the States for maybe 15 or 20 years. Now, they were also really poor. You've probably heard of the standard, American immigrant story where you
Mhm.
come here with nothing,
Right.
$20. And my dad did that, and he actually worked his way up to buy a company, and then he sold it. Again, actually doing computer science. So there's a lot of luck in my life. Most of it is actually due to him being able to find his way out of that country and come here. I've also been very lucky, though. I was able to go to NYU Business School where we started Tap Commerce, and we got really lucky with that company. We were able to build a mobile advertising system when mobile phones were first getting big, and we were able to sell the company in a way that most companies aren't able to sell it. No matter what you say or what you think, luck is always a factor. But I do believe that if you work a lot, you are putting yourself in a position where you can get lucky, maybe more often than people who don't work as much. And so I think that hopefully, maybe I'm biased, but good things come to those who work for it, even if luck is a factor.
All right. So I know this gets a little bit philosophical now, but we always do these questions. If you never stumbled up in tech and product management, what do you imagine you would be doing today? So alternative universe, Shanif, what do you see this Shanif doing?
And I thought
Which
a
is
lot about,
maybe second best or even best of best. Maybe this is not still not your best
yeah,
version. I don't know. But up to you to
I don't,
tell me.
I thought about this. There's a world where I actually sold options, stock options, when I was in business school to pay for my rent in New York. And there's a world where I might have started a small hedge fund where I was selling options and buying options as a way to invest in and trade other people's money and doing the
Instead
hedge
of
fund
tech,
route.
you'd be a financial guy.
Yeah, but that scares me because, man, I don't know if I want to do finance. So I might have gone into finance. I might have gone into NGO work, but I'm glad I don't have that. I'm glad that that parallel universe isn't the real universe. So it's a little bit hard to say, but that's what I
Yeah,
would think.
that's good. We are in the right universe after all.
There you
So,
go.
how did your passion for AI and e-commerce came about?
I think it started with AI. I remember when I was going through school, my university, and I took this class where it introduced me to data science. The whole concept was if you've got data from the past, you might be able to probabilistically say what's going to happen in the future. And we actually had data
Which is
on the
great for finance as well.
it is great. And that's why I was saying I might be a finance guy, which is kind of crazy because I'm not a finance guy today, but it is great. And I always love data. And you can use data in lots of different ways. This one class actually gave us data on the NASA space shuttles, and they gave us data about which parts of the space shuttles were failures and which shuttles, unfortunately, eventually crashed or exploded. And we were then shown how to use that data to understand what were the leading causes of failures for these space shuttles. And I thought that was interesting because you could use something from the past to almost forecast the future. And to me, as like a nerdy tech guy growing up, that was like a holy grail. So I got interested in AI first. I got really interested in the concept of being able to forecast the future. And then what we ended up doing at Tap Commerce was we started applying some of this to our mobile advertising. We started using data to be able to optimize the prices that we were paying to show ads and how much we would charge when somebody clicked on one of our ads. And that worked pretty well. And so this basically integration or sort of confluence of factors came to play. But I was at Tap Commerce where my interest in data and AI and my interest in e-commerce sort of came together in a product and that product worked pretty well and made us a good amount of money.
All right. So going back a little bit to your early days of building Apteo, which is your most recent, I guess the most recent before the last one.
Before the current one.
Right, the current one. What was it? What was it like? What was the key challenge, the key needs that you were trying to address? Was this early data inspired version of yours that decided to go into that way? What was really the trigger?
It's totally crazy. Everything was a challenge, as anyone who's done a startup knows. So Apteo, we ended up pivoting 7 or 8 times. The original concept was being able to use data, back to finance, being able to use data to optimize stock picks for individuals so that they can make more money. And we quickly found there was no business there, at least in those days. Maybe there would be today. Eventually, we found ourselves in the world of e-commerce. And what we were doing was
pivoted towards e-commerce.
We pivoted first towards being more of a data science in a box, and then we pivoted from that towards being more of a e-commerce optimization platform, and then we pivoted from that to being what we ended up with, which was predictive marketing for e-commerce. Basically, what that means is we would use all the order data from stores to predict what customers were going to buy what products next, and then we would essentially tie into Facebook ads and emails to help our brands show those ads.
Let's just dive a little bit into this first pivot, right? You were doing something, you said, oh, okay, there's no product market fit in this space. We need to pivot. What was it like? It's like this joint group decision inside the team, the founders. Was it obvious that e-commerce was the place to go? What is the decision process here?
Definitely wasn't e-commerce for our first pivot. So what happened was we were building this machine learning system that would take in hundreds of millions of data points about stocks, and then it would also take in tens of thousands of financial articles and analyst opinions, so text analysis.
Right.
Unfortunately, before ChatGPT. It would use all this information and try to predict what would happen in the future. And so we built a system that did that, and then we tried to build a product that would essentially provide those forecasts to individual stock traders. And what we found was that there aren't that many people, at least here in the US, who are really interested in trading their own stocks. So in the US, I think something like 10% of the population has stocks. And out of those people, I think something like 9 out of 10 of them only invest in index funds. And so the people who are actually interested in investing actively is quite small. And so reaching them became a big challenge. So we weren't able to generate a business from this product. So the first pivot was, well, instead of doing this for the individual investor, maybe we should do this for hedge funds and banks. Maybe we can sell this to large corporations. So that was the first pivot. We started building a system to do that for the companies. And then what we found was that the sales cycle for these banks was very long, about 2 years.
Wow.
And so quite long. What ended up happening was right around the time that we decided to do this, we got into an accelerator, a standard startup accelerator here in New York, Entrepreneurs Roundtable.
Which one?
And it's called Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator, ERA. It's an accelerator that's really focused on New York City, so maybe not as many people know it around the world, but they do a good job with New York startups. And they really encouraged us to explore where our core technology, this technology of analyzing text data and analyzing hundreds of millions of data points could be used. And so if we started trying to sell this to banks, we ended up not being able to sell it because our cash flow wasn't that great because of the long sales cycles. And then we said, okay, well, if this doesn't work for banks, maybe this will work for marketing companies. So what we did was we built a system where marketing companies can input data sets like Facebook ads data or email addresses and orders data. And what we found was most people were using this to do things like optimizing for churn. So like predicting who's going to churn, or a few people were predicting the performance of their advertising campaigns. So we did more interviews with them, and we found that there's a lot of people who wanted to use this for e-commerce, specifically for advertising. And so we made another pivot, maybe our 6th or 7th one, as I said, where we scrapped everything we had built, and then we started building a platform that would allow e-commerce stores to optimize repeat purchases. Specifically, this is where we ended up figuring out what customers were likely to buy which products, and then incentivizing them to buy those products with ads and emails and campaigns. So it's a long way of me answering your question, Andre. I apologize, but it's a series of pivots that got us to where we were.
Yeah, usually it is like that, right? It's never like this romanticized idea that, you have an idea, then you make it, then it just starts growing, right?
Yeah,
There's a number of pivots. Sometimes founders are not very vocal about them. I don't know why. Sometimes they're not. They just pretend that the story started year zero, but
right. Yeah,
there's a year minus, 2 and 3 where they're still struggling and finding,
yeah.
trying to find the way. All right. So eventually you ended up going and creating this new company of yours, which is Nobi. What was the inside of getting to Nobi? Is this like a natural act two from
Mhm.
Apteo? What's the story here, the storyline?
And quick break. Did you know this year's Productized conference is a big one? We're celebrating our 10th edition. For a decade, we've been bringing product managers, designers, and innovators together in Lisbon for top-tier insights, interactive workshops, and invaluable networking. This year, it's bigger and better than ever with world-class speakers and special anniversary celebrations. Don't miss your chance to be part of it October 16th to 17th in Lisbon.
Join us for the big celebration. Tickets are now available at www.productized.co. We hope to meet you there.
It's almost funny because after Tap Commerce and Twitter and Apteo, I was sort of done with e-commerce for a while. I was like, okay, let me go try something else. So we originally built Nobi as a way for internal teams to be able to find and analyze or be able to look up information from all of their connected data sources. So what we found was teams have a lot of information, maybe in Google Docs or Notion. And what we found was a lot of people said, well, that's fine. We also want to be able to do things like, what if we could just provide this assistant that we had built to our users? And so what we found was a lot of people, again, this is another pivot story. People said, hey, like what you have built, this AI assistant is interesting, but I really want to be able to give it to my website users or put it on my website so that my users can get what they need more quickly. So we started pulling on that thread. We started interviewing them about what they really wanted. And we found that there were a lot of e-commerce stores who had really sort of efficient search engines, search results, and they were interested in using an AI assistant to improve their searches. So what does that mean? Well, if you search for something like black sweater on a website, you might not be able to get the dark gray cashmere cardigan on that
Right.
website, even though
Right.
it's almost the same thing,
Right.
but with traditional search engines.
Yeah,
But you
because
can with our,
just for people that are not so versed into the technicalities behind it, that's because traditional search engines are essentially database queries, right? They just search for black. If the word black is not there, to just ignore everything else, right?
yeah, they're
Is
keyword
this
matches
correct?
for the most part.
Keyword matches, right? So the difference here when you bring AI to the table is that you're allowing for a much more contextualized, human-like way of thinking, right? Where, well, it's black, but it's also a little bit all
Yeah.
the shades of gray that kind of resemble black as well, and so on and so forth, right?
And maybe it's a cardigan and not a sweater, and so almost exactly the same thing, but traditional search wouldn't pick it up. But
Right.
AI
Because
search can.
humans are like that, right? I mean, people
Yeah,
refer to things like in very fuzzy definitions.
yeah,
They're not computers.
exactly.
Okay, so you've started selling this optimized AI-powered search engine for e-commerces.
Yeah, so we're still in the early days, but what we're finding is there's a lot of interest in the ability for these search engines to drive new sales. So here's essentially where we started. We've come up with a handful of early customers where they are interested in testing out the search engine's performance. So what they're doing is they're installing our search engine. They're maybe driving 10 to 15% of traffic to it. They're comparing the 10 to 15% to like a control group. And we are in the early days still, but what we're hopeful and what we're starting to see is our search engine does provide different search results, or it does provide some search results, whereas the old engine would not provide any. Now, what we are doing as we work with these companies is optimizing that search experience from soup to nuts, from start to finish. So finding the right search results is step one. But then you have to be able to easily allow the person to add a product to their cart. And so our search engine now will be able to support something like a quick add button, or you might have to answer questions about products, or our search engine will essentially become an assistant and be able to ask and answer questions about a product. So it's a bit early, Andre. We are in the early days of this because most of our earlier work was focused more on the internal teams assistant, which I'm happy to talk about, but there's a lot of interest and we're able to find more customers for this now than we were for the internal team assistant. And we're in the early days of testing it out.
Right. Okay. So you are working in obviously a fairly competitive space. A lot of people say AIs will become rather commoditized, a little bit like, utilities, right? Everything is AI powered. So what's really the differentiation, right? If everything is AI powered, there's just one more. So how do you stay ahead of this shifts using AI, or what do you see as the most common? All right. So let's stick with this one. So how do you actually see um, that your underlying thesis, that if I understand right, is we want to maximize consumer spending by allowing them to find the products they want, and not just that, maximizing the chances that they understand the product through this recommendation and personalization. Along with this lines that you have to stay ahead of the curve. You have a very competitive space out there. So how do you see that?
It's a fantastic question. So a little bit of context, I think, will help me answer the question. In the past, I have tried to build companies based on the latest and greatest technologies. There's a new technology for doing X, so we're going to base our entire company on that. What I learned was it's much more about how well you solve the problem for the customer, and in this case, the customer's customer. And if you are able to do that well, almost doesn't matter what technologies you're using. Of course, it does to a certain extent. But if you're able to do it well, you're able to make the customer happy, you're able to find the end user what they need, then that's a much better way to get ahead of any other AI company that is trying to do what they're doing. So how does that apply to us? Well, you're right. Everybody is saying they've got an AI-powered platform right now. And our old system, which was internal assistant for teams, was a very strong AI-powered platform, but it didn't sell, even though there were a lot of features to it. What we're seeing now is we are hyper-focused on this one thing, and we are doing it in a way that we understand what the brands, what these e-commerce companies really want, and we're working closely with them to build it. So what we're finding is there's a lot more interest in us being able to solve this one specific problem, regardless of whether there are other companies that are doing it or not, or doing something similar. So it's a long way of us saying we're solving the problem and we're just finding the right tools to do it. At the moment, the tool is AI assistance with LLMs, but we might eventually switch to creating our own models like I did at Apteo, or we might be able to switch to something that is a joint system with AI and custom models. We might get rid of AI models entirely. I don't think that's going to happen. But as long as we're solving the core problem, that's essentially where we're focused. So I know it's kind of a cheap out answer, but ultimately I've built many things that people don't care about just by using the best technologies, and I've stopped doing that, and now I'm focused on the problem.
All right. So what's the most common problem e-commerce businesses face when implementing personalized AI, or they're trying to do it? Because I guess if you have an e-commerce, this is kind of the first derivative is, the usual stuff, but the second derivative is this, right? You want to optimize churn, you want to optimize retention. How do you do that? And what kind of e-commerces are you actually catering to? So is it obviously the big ones, like the big ones, they have their own AI teams and they have their own personalization, machine learning teams. But so what is your ideal customer, and what's that ideal customer most common problem?
So it's a good question. Personalization is where I've spent the past 7 or 8 years of my career, at Twitter and then Apteo, and now Nobi. When it comes to personalization, it helps to get a specific about what that could mean. So there's a lot of things out there that are being used today for personalization. Product recommendations on site. People who like this also like, X, Y, and Z. Amazon's really good at that. There are personal product recommendations from emails and from ads that you see online. What they do is they take data about what you bought in the past and they try to find what you're going to buy in the future. A lot of these things are well-solved problems. And
solved. You think they are well solved? Well
Yeah.
solved and well served as well, because one thing is well solved for Amazon and for the big ones, but is it well solved and well served for tier 2, tier 3 e-commerce operators out there?
I would venture to say yes. When we were building Apteo, there were many, many different competitors doing this. And there is 500 different Shopify apps now if you're on Shopify. And there's a bunch of people who have solved this problem from a technical standpoint. Their go-to-market and their distribution is getting pretty good. Now, e-commerce suffered a lot in 2022 and 21, I believe, when things went sort of belly up. So there might not be as many companies doing it today, but the companies that are doing it are pretty good at what they do. Where we're focused on now is we have this concept of if like a personal shopping assistant, like if you go into a store, like a really high-end store, a sales associate will greet you and they'll say, hey, what are you looking for? Why are you buying this? Are you going to an event? Are you going to a wedding? So it starts with understanding the customer and then searching for the right products. And that's not as well served and that's not as well developed right now. And so what we're focused on is sort of this gap in the market, starting with search, where we think that there's a better way to get customers what they're looking for, kind of like what you have when you have a personal shopping assistant. That's an area where in order to do that well, you have to start with understanding the customer's intent. What we found is, and what a lot of our retail partners have told us is when a customer comes into a store, they might ask a sales associate, I need a black tuxedo. But that's because they've already done a ton of thinking and a ton of research on, well, I'm going to a wedding. It's going to be in this formal area, so I need a black tuxedo. The sales associate has to backtrack a little bit. They're saying, why do you need this? What are you trying to do? And then they're able to get them the best quality product. We're taking a similar approach where our AI assistant will, yes, it'll find you a black tuxedo, but it'll try to interact with you and engage with you to understand what you need. And then once it has a sense for what you need, we're able to do things like upselling you. So, hey, you have a black tuxedo, maybe you want a shirt, and maybe you want these shoes as well. It's able to suggest other items. It's able to recommend, how do you take care of it? Is this tuxedo washable? Is it not? So we're approaching personalization from like the personal shopping assistant standpoint, which I don't think is well served yet. And we're doing it by trying to understand the customer and then providing that understanding to an AI system that understands your products and your business so it can provide the best recommendations.
Are you considering any specific verticals, or because inside e-commerce you can go all the way from second-hand dealership cars all the way to the more classical stuff? So what are the verticals where you think this personalized AI will actually work best? Just because, I used to work, I am still working pretty much in innovation consulting, and for some years, we worked on personalized AI. Well, not so much AI because this was a few years ago, so it was more heuristic based and mechanical Turks, right? To help people to find the right car in dealerships, right? So the student that wants to commute to college, or the nurse that needs to go to hospital late in the night, so she cannot really afford to take public transportation. And it was really hard, right? It's a dark science. It's an art form. It's every person. But what I'm trying to say here is that several studies say that buying a car, even a secondhand car, is a 20 plus. So when you do the customer journey map, it's a 20 plus interaction point. People consider so many things, and the journey starts, several months ago, and they go and they speak to their parents or their friends and here and there. So, are you considering verticals that are more prone to be disrupted by this personalized AI thesis of yours?
I love this question. We're considering verticals where there's a large catalog of products and users have trouble finding those products. And one area where that tends to be the case is fashion and retail apparel. So that is one of our areas where we're working with a couple of customers now. We're also considering jewelry and accessories like handbags, things like that. Those are some areas where people are looking at us quite a bit.
Do you think there's a different approach to using this personalized AIs, whether you're female or male? Do you see consumers being divided into different cohorts and having different perspectives? Because we found that males and females react quite differently to different aspects in the commerce journey, like queuing times and stuff. And depending on the vertical, of course, for fashion, women tend to be much more adamant to certain aspects, while men are much more adamant to other verticals. So is there any data evidence that you have that different people and cohorts of people behave differently to this specific product that you're trying to implement?
There's a lot of data actually that shows that, and you're absolutely right. Women and men behave differently at the highest, most general level.
Right.
People, they behave differently. what's cool about AI, and particularly machine learning, which is this subset of AI, is if you are able to record and account for the attributes of the person, male versus female, even what's their email domain, Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, or it's a company domain, the algorithm is able to distinguish and determine the impact of these attributes and understand how they might impact the likelihood of purchasing. So when we were doing Apteo, what we actually found was that the most predictive factor, the thing that would make the biggest impact in how much this person would spend, what would they buy, is in the US, it's the zip code. Where do they live?
Right.
So in the US, these zip codes are tightly grouped areas, sometimes that control like small neighborhoods where there's a lot of people. And that is very predictive of where you live. So if you've got an algorithm that takes into account zip code and gender and all these other things, you can pretty, not accurately, but with a high degree of certainty, predict what people are going to buy. And so if you're building a shopping assistant, you can start to do the same thing. You can start to say, okay, this person has mentioned that they need a tuxedo. Well, right away, they're probably male, or this person needs a dress, or this person is shopping for a handbag. You can start to take this into account. And the cool thing about AI assistants today is you can provide them background information about how they should behave when they know about a certain type of personality attribute or trait. And when you're talking to an assistant as a user, you don't see those instructions in the background that maybe me as the brand has provided, but the AI assistant will follow those instructions. Brands or software developers can start to customize and configure these AI assistants to behave differently based on what the person is asking for, which then implies who they are and ultimately as a person.
So yeah, I think there's this future, and we were talking about this alternative universe, but this future where, and I guess it's a desirable future where everyone is his her own AI personal shopper, right? Which is something that very few people can afford right now, unless they're quite rich or they have, they're really interested in having that. But most people can't, right? Unless they're really rich, they cannot really afford to have personalized or a personal shopper. How do you see that coming in? Are you obviously bullish on this thesis, but you're doing it for e-commerces? But you could argue that there is this agency issue, which is if I'm working with a personal AI shopping agent from e-commerce X, my interest is orthogonal to the interest of the shop, right? If I don't find my optimal product, the agent will not say, oh yeah, maybe you shouldn't buy here, maybe you should go to another shop, or maybe you should just wait 6 months and wait for the promotion or whatever it is. There's space for independent agents where people could maybe even pay, $20 per month or $50, the average AI price, and have this vested agent actually interested in helping people find the right product at the right time, and that kind of the typical personal shopper experience. How do you see this coming? Is this something you see in your radar, or you don't believe so much because you think that the demand will be driven by e-commerce, and the e-commerce platform will always be at the forefront of the tech?
This is definitely something we've thought a lot about. There's a couple of things to unpack here. On the first hand, you're right. Consumers generally want to get the best products for the lowest prices possible, and brands generally want to sell as much as they can to a given consumer.
So you have this forces, right? You have these competing forces against each other, which is normal.
Yeah.
It's just market tension.
Absolutely. So if today, we build products for the brand. Our company is B2B, which means that we are trying to make sure that we can get consumers to buy, the products that they like with as minimal friction as possible. If you're a consumer, though, I guarantee you, and this is something we've thought about building as well, we will have apps where you have the product feeds from thousands of different stores, and the app is responsible for finding you the best products. Maybe like a new age version of Amazon or a new age version of Google Shopping. There is a segment of customers who respect the brand itself. So there's a segment of customers who will always sort of try to buy from the brands that they trust, the brands that they know. And sometimes they might try to get discounts, but many times they don't care about sales. They don't care about anything else. They care about quality. They care about the brand. They care about interacting with the company that they know. In cases like that, an AI assistant will work differently. There is also a segment of people who want to get the best price possible, who are always looking for the best deal. In cases like that, the AI assistant will work differently. What I'm saying is, I believe there's going to be consumer-facing apps that are designed to optimize the consumer's ability to find what they need. And there's going to be B2B plugins and B2B apps like ours that are sitting on the e-commerce store that are designed also to find the users what they need, but only from that store. What we have found is if you can get the user what they need as quickly as possible on your store, then they are more likely to add to the cart. They're more likely to complete a checkout. So what that means for us is while we continue to build the B2B platform, our job is to provide the best possible search results to the user. And the user then may have to decide, hey, I don't want to shop from the store, or I might want to shop from another store, which is fine. It's their prerogative. But for those users who want to shop from a particular brand, we can maximize their add to cart values by showing them the products that they're most likely to want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great promise. So from a more technical standpoint, what are the biggest hurdles when scaling this machine learning driven business? Is it the machine learning models themselves? What like the biggest technical challenges you guys are facing at the moment? Or even back at Apteo, right? When you were still doing your previous startup.
I'll give you sort of break it down. So at Apteo, where we were taking in large amounts of orders data from a store, the biggest challenge there was building a model that was highly accurate at forecasting what users were going to buy next and how much they were going to buy next. What we found was a large majority of users, I think something like 80 to 90%, would only ever buy one thing from a store and they would never come back. So what we had to do was create a model that could identify those users, but then also for people who were likely to come back, identify what they were likely to buy next. From a data science standpoint, those are two very different problems, and building models to account for those was a very fun but very challenging technical problem, which we eventually ended up solving with modeling. Today in Nobi, the challenge today is from a technical side, how do you get the most accurate search results to the user with as minimal amount of time as possible? So what does that mean? Today, you can get search results that are kind of accurate very, very quickly. And you can also get really accurate search results that take a little bit longer to get to the user. And the reason is you need to use an LLM and an LLM's ability to reason to get those results. But LLMs are slow. And so today there's this balance between making sure you get the users their initial search results quickly, but also making sure they're accurate. There's a few things that we're researching in order to make that possible, but that continues to be a challenge for us. And it's something I'm excited to solve because it's an interesting technical problem.
And from a more managerial standpoint, how do you manage such a diverse team? You have now everyone remote. That's what we were talking about just before. Still a rather small team, but I guess growing with engineers, designers, business development people. And you have yourself a technically minded, you are a technically minded founder, I understand. So how do you juggle this?
There is something I've learned over the past few years, and that is the fewer people you have to manage, the better off you are. So at Apteo, we got a bigger team. Tap Commerce, we had a really big team. At Apteo, I still wanted to have a big team because it was the first time I was leading a company. Today, I'm trying to have a minimal sized team using AI to do everything I can. Now, what I'm very lucky to have is a team that I've worked well with in the past in previous companies. So I understand how they work. I understand for the most part how they operate, and I understand sort of what people need to get their jobs finished. So what I do today, first and foremost, I just keep the team really lean. There's only a few of us and we all have very well-defined roles. From a management standpoint, I think one of the biggest things I've learned is over communication is really important because no matter how many times you say something, people won't understand it. Over communication is really important. Making sure that expectations are written down from an engineering side of things. This is the due date. This is what I expect the product to do. This is how I expect it to work. Making sure all that's written down and it's clear. So there are no misconceptions. From a sales and marketing standpoint, making sure that everyone understands what's the approach. How are we moving forward? Today, I'm actually not handling the sales and marketing. My co-founder is. And so all this goes to say, keep things lean, over communicate, make sure everybody understands expectations, and just kind of avoid the hierarchy, avoid any process that's unnecessary, which is really easy to do with a lean team, and stay in constant contact and constant communication. I think those are really helpful, at least in the early days. As we grow, we're going to have to add process, but my hope is that we can stay as lean and small as possible.
You also said, and I'm quoting, using AI to do everything I can. So can you give us like a couple of
Yeah.
examples where you're using AI to everything you can?
Yeah. One of the things I learned at Apteo was the power of SEO, search engine optimization. But it takes a lot of time to create a really good set of articles and blog posts and research that will lead to clicks. Now, what I've done in the past year and a half is I have used AI to help me generate high quality articles. I don't let it write the entire article from scratch. But what I do is I use AI to come up with and to research what are the strongest keywords and the strongest areas that I can write content in. Then I ask it to come up with an outline for me based on similar articles that are ranking at the top of Google or Bing. When I have the article, I then work with it section by section to come up with the content. And then I will ask it to create the content. I'll ask it to edit it. I will edit it myself. Now, what this has allowed me to do is it used to take me a week and a half to generate a really high quality article. It takes me a couple of hours now. And by that, using that process to come up with the high quality article in just a couple of hours, I'm able to push more content, which is able to allow me to get more leads through the funnel. So that's one way where I'm using AI. Another way is I'm using that old AI assistant I created, Locusive, to essentially help me find content that I should be writing about, or it helps me create strategies for content. For example, I have documented every single LinkedIn post and every single article I've created in a Notion workspace. We've hooked up that Notion workspace to the AI assistant we generated. And now we ask the assistant to pull the most relevant articles about a particular topic, use everything we've created in the past, and then come up with an outline for a new article. And so that's an area where I no longer have to spend as much time brainstorming because the AI is able to find what I've written about or gaps where I haven't written about something. And so SEO is a major area where AI helps. As far as other areas of AI, I've been able to use it to create videos. So a product description or a product demonstration video now can take me a weekend versus a month. Able to generate the voiceover using AI, able to generate the transitions from one scene to the next using AI, and able to generate the actual video content sometimes by using something like Sora or OpenAI to generate video. So those are areas where marketing has really helped. We may or may not end up using AI for sales. There's a lot of companies today who are doing things like automated calls, automated emails. That's not an area we've experimented with yet, but potentially. So those are some areas that immediately today we've already seen improvements, and we may try to expand that into the future. And then, of course, I forgot to mention the most important thing is coding. I've probably written about 40% of my code using AI, and that's made me so much more productive, which makes me able to push code faster, create products faster, respond to user requests faster, which is really important in startup life.
All right. So additionally, during your time at Twitter, you worked on analyzing user behavior, optimizing content engagement, and so on. And on Twitter Now X, how did you apply data science and machine learning in those areas? Because those were early days. I understand you were there until 2017 or so. So you spent your tenure, just after 2015. So still very much Twitter days, right? So what was the challenge back then?
Well, I think for me, I started on the ads team because we had sold Tap Commerce to Twitter. They wanted to integrate us into the ads team. And so I worked on being able to improve the machine learning systems that were predicting which ads people would click on. And so that was pure machine learning, data science, where I stayed about a year. And then I eventually moved to another team where we were using data science to understand what content people were consuming so that our creators on the Moments team, which was the first product that was curated, would be able to create high quality content, or at least curate high quality content. And then I moved to an internal BI team where I was doing things like analyzing product performance. I actually analyzed the onboarding sequence that a new user would go through, and we did a lot of work there, found a lot of inefficiencies there, and all of this was data science. Some of it in the early days, like I mentioned, was machine learning. Others was more analytics, but it was all using data to improve the Twitter product.
Right. And you had been a co-founder of Tap Commerce. Is that correct, or not as a co-founding element?
So I called myself a pseudo co-founder, enough equity where it mattered, and I was leading up the engineering team and then leading up the analytics team. And so the guys who had started the business that Tap Commerce became had started working on a previous product before I joined them. So they were the founders of the company, but I got in early enough where it was impactful.
All right. And sometimes the experience of going from your, pseudo founder or just founder or actual founder actually to a tween, company that acquires you, right? It's not so easy, right? Because you have your own turf, you have your own territory, and suddenly you are, much bigger. You are just a cog in a big machine. How is that change of speed? And especially speed, right? Because when you're
Yeah.
a startup, everything moves fast, everything needs to be fast. But, in a big machine like Twitter, those days, you probably have different perspective on speed. How was that change felt?
It was night and day. My first job was also at a large company, and then we got into Twitter, which was a large company, and they just work very differently. They're slower, they're a little bit more process oriented, there's a lot more bureaucracy and politics. But of course, they're making more money. So on the one hand, I was making a salary and I was able to sell the stock that I had, because it was a publicly traded company. On the other hand, the day-to-day work dramatically slowed down. And what's funny is they bought us and then they started integrating us into their ads product. And then in about 8 months, they completely shut us down and we sort of all went to different teams within Twitter. So I had started from working on the same product that I had been working on for the previous few years to working on something totally different with a team of folks who I just had never worked with before, who probably may or may not have been folks that we had hired into our own startup. So it's a very different speed from all aspects. But of course, you still try to create it. Like I really enjoy creating technology, creating products, working on data science. So you try to take enjoyment from that. You try to do the best you can. But for me, I was waiting for the next opportunity I had to start my next company. And so after a few years, I was able to do that with Apteo.
Very well. So let's take that segue and ask you a little bit, wrapping up from your experience, how can early stage startups or even founders, if they haven't created a startup yet, and I guess some people listening to that are this, pre-founder, they're still trying to come up with something, effectively leverage data and analytics without overwhelming themselves in too much complexity? Or what kind of opportunities do you still see in this space for, founders to tap into?
There's so much out there when it comes to data and analytics. What I would recommend, the founders I've seen work best are either founders who have worked for many years in a particular industry or a particular problem area that they understand well, and they have a new way of solving that problem, or founders who are able to validate or invalidate hypotheses extremely quickly. So when it comes to data, actually, I would say data scientists may not be the best use of making decisions in the early days because one, you don't have a lot of data to work with. Two, data science is really good for optimizing incrementality, going from 3% to 4% or 5% to 7%. It's not so good for starting something from scratch because a lot of that is unknown. And so as a founder in the early days, if you have a problem that you have experienced in your own life and you have a new way of solving it, there's a great opportunity to start working on a way to test your hypothesis, start building an initial product. If you don't, what I would try to do and what we did with Nobi is try to sell a solution as widespread as you can, perhaps even before building it. And if you find that there's a lot of demand for that solution, you can then start to incorporate aspects of machine learning or AI that might be beneficial for that solution. So maybe a counterintuitive argument for someone who's coming as a data scientist, but it's what I have seen work well in the early days.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Shanif. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. We have talked about AI, scaling startups, leveraging data, science, business growth, entrepreneurship. Just before we wrap up, what's the best way for people to find out more about you or your work or Nobi AI or anything like that you might want to, or even
Absolutely.
this project in north of Pakistan in the Himalayas region that maybe more people might be interested in joining?
That would be great. We would always love folks who are interested. So feel free to email me directly. My name is Shanif, SHANIF @ Nobi, NOBI.ai. So Shanif at Nobi.ai. I try to respond to everyone who comes in, genuinely. You can also check out our website if you're an e-commerce store. It's just nobi.ai. I've also been publishing a newsletter on AI agents. You can find that on LinkedIn, just linkedin.com/in/Shanif Dhanani. Feel free to reach out. I always love talking about this stuff, as you can tell. I might talk your ear off, but would love to hear
Yes,
from folks.
you are very passionate about it. Are you mentoring any startups, or are you having any active
Yeah,
position as a
I
investor?
am an investor in a couple of small startups, and I'm a technical consultant on a couple of startups as well. And so I always love chatting with founders, and if I can help them out, then I do try to do so. And so if you're a startup founder who's looking for help or advice or mentorship or someone to do something technical, please feel free to reach out.
Great. All right. So for our listeners, don't forget to follow Productized on LinkedIn and subscribe to our podcast for more great conversations. Also, follow Shanif on LinkedIn or send him an email, because Shanif is so kind to, say that he actually answers emails. Stay updated on his work, or just get some ideas. Inviting also our listeners to Productized Conference. As you know, Productized Conference 2025 is coming for its 10th anniversary. So we are celebrating 10 years next year, and we want to do a big party here in Lisbon. So make sure that you join us. And Shanif, obviously, you're more than welcome to join us here in
Awesome.
Lisbon if you're also interested in October 2025. See you. Have a great one.
Thank you. Take care.